Hello, I know it's been a little while since I've done my teaching series on Loving by Faith. I took last week off because of Christmas, but this week we're back at it. So I'm going to start this week with a cute little story that I found about two towns in Italy. A long time ago, in an Italian city, they built a beautiful tower which was admired by everyone passing through. A little further down the road, in a neighboring city, they had built a tower of similar beauty. The two towers were equally well known. The people of the second city, envious and filled with pride, planned to destroy the neighboring tower so it wouldn't take attention away from their own tower. One dark night, they came to the tower with picks and shovels and began to quietly undermine the tower's foundations. The next morning, the tower was leaning slightly, but no one seemed to notice. The same thing happened for the following few days, until a little girl who was passing by pointed up at the tower and said, "I think that tower's going to fall down." And everyone around looked closely, and they could see that she was right. Nervousness spread through the city. They tried no end of solutions to try to straighten the tower, but the days passed and nothing seemed to work. That was until one day when the same little girl was walking by again and she leaned her arm on the side of the tower to rest. She felt the tower tremble slightly and the sound of creaking and groaning. When she took her hand off of it, the movement and the noises stopped. But when she put her hand back on it again, the same thing happened. The girl spent some time doing this until she was completely certain of what she had discovered. The tower is ticklish. She ran to get some flowers and plants, and she planted them right next to the tower. Now, if the tower leaned over any further, it would be tickled by the petals and the leaves of those plants. Being a ticklish tower, it would have to return back to where it had been. In this way, the girl managed to make sure the tower didn't collapse, but still kept it leaning a little. The fact that it was leaning made it even more famous. This taught a fine lesson to the envious people of the neighboring city. Being jealous types, they tried to copy the lean of the first tower, but they couldn't do it, and the tower ended up collapsing, leaving the city not only with a tower, but also without a city hall. So, according to this, I would think is a fictitious children's story, we can see how we got the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I think it was kind of cute. But it has a deeper lesson than that. It talks about how jealousy can affect our lives. Now, today we're going to look at how love is not envious or jealous. So, if we're to understand what love is, we must look at 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8a. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. So, what exactly is envy or jealousy? The Greek word for envy or jealousy is phthonos. It is a strong feeling that sours a person due to the influence of sin. It is a miserable trait of being glad when someone experiences misfortune or pain. It can also energize somebody with an embittered mind, such as, well, I'll go into that a little later. but I've had some experience with this. This is displeasure with another person's good. And without longing to raise yourself up to the level of the person you envy, but to pull him down. Okay? Um, this is also to burn with zeal with this feeling. Um, it is basically, it's a burning inside of you that is very, very negative and wants to see something negative happen to the person that you're jealous of. Okay. Now, the English word for jealousy is defined as an unhappy or angry feeling of wanting to have what someone else has. This feeling is caused by the belief that someone you love, such as a husband or wife, likes or is liked by someone else. So to put this all together, envy is an attitude of burning zeal that sours a person's soul because that person is glad when someone else experiences a misfortune or pain, or they want what someone else has. Love does not have this attitude. Love is not envious. So if you're envious, you've got to check yourself and ask yourself, am I really loving? Am I really loving this person if I am envious of them? So let's apply this 4-step process to not being envious. So the first step is to make a conscious choice to believe that God is not glad when we experience misfortune or pain, and that He wants what we have, and then act on that decision. In John 11, we find the story of the death and resurrection of Lazarus. The shortest verse in the Bible is in this chapter because when Jesus saw how distressed Mary and Martha were over their brother's death, He wept. God weeps when we weep because He loves us so much that He feels our pain. And what's interesting about this is Jesus completely knew what He was going to be doing, that He was going to be raising Lazarus from the dead. Okay? So His weeping was not a weeping of grief. This is a weeping of the pain that Mary and Martha felt. Okay? Because He cared so much about these women that He didn't want them to feel this kind of pain. And He felt the same pain that they did. James 4:15 and 16. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Jesus is our high priest, and He understands our weaknesses and our pain. So when we make a conscious decision to believe that this is true, then how we act on it is to go boldly to God in prayer and not be afraid that He will strike us dead if we say something wrong. This happened to me, 20 some odd years ago. This actually started a huge part of my healing from my childhood and stuff. I lost my grandfather. My grandfather was the only man in my life to show me some true fatherly love when I was a child. My father was abusive. My stepfather was abusive. And I had no other men in my life. My grandfather was the only one to show me true fatherly love when I was a child. But he passed away of bone cancer when I was 6 years old. And in 1998, I started dealing with this issue, and I got angry with God. I got very angry with God. And I started yelling and screaming at God, why did you take the only man in my life that truly loved me with a true father's love? Why did you have to take him from me? And I got so angry and I cried my eyes out. And once I cried my eyes out, then I said, okay, God, you can strike me dead now. Because I've been raised to believe that we should never be angry with God. But instead of striking me dead, God gave me such a sense of peace. And he, I fell asleep in this envelope of peace. And so it was like God saying, I understand your frustration. I understand your anger. I know that you don't understand my ways. And so because I understand, I'm not jealous of you. I'm not angry with you. I'm going to give you peace. So God is not jealous of us. He's not angry with us. He understands our weaknesses and pains. And when he understands that, and we understand that he is not jealous of us, then we can go boldly to him. We can express anything we're feeling to him in confidence. And that was a turning point in my life. I realized that God really does truly love us, and he truly wants to be there with us. Hopefully, through my sharing of that story, you can come to the same understanding. The second point is to make a conscious decision to not be glad when God experiences pain, or to want what God has and act on that decision. The first time I was able to teach this was while I was in school. We had an assignment to do a small group Bible study for 6 weeks. And I started this teaching curriculum. And I had an older lady from the church I was attending come to this Bible study. And the week after I'd given this lesson, she told me that she had realized that she had been jealous of God because she had had a miscarriage many years earlier. And she was jealous of God because he had her child and she did not. It was a turning point in her life because she realized that she craved what God had because she didn't have it. And she was jealous of that. So how can we crave what God has? Satan craved for what God had, and that is why he was cast out of heaven. Isaiah 14:12-14. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the further sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be the Most High. So Satan was very jealous and was so full of pride, the same as that second tower town was. Okay? And because of that, he was cast out of heaven, out of the most wonderful place he could be. Okay? And his life was destroyed just as that town's city hall was destroyed when their tower collapsed. So the way we prevent ourselves, so how do we prevent ourselves from craving what God has? We do that by concentrating on how much he has given us and worshiping him as a result. So what is worship? If we are to act on the decision and not be envious of God and is to worship him, then we must know what worship is. This was rather interesting. Long before I went to RU, I didn't have a clue of what I was really doing, but I just followed an instinct. My very first word study search was on worship. And this is, like I said, long before I even knew what I was doing. My mother had this great big, gigantic, a biblical concordance. And in the back of that concordance had a Hebrew and Greek dictionary. So I looked up the word worship. The concordance was all done in alphabetical order. So I looked up the word worship. And what's interesting about this concordance is when each of the words had a little number off to the side. That number corresponded to the Greek or Hebrew word that was being used to translate into worship in that particular verse. Okay? So I would look up the Greek and Hebrew words. And then when you looked up the Greek and Hebrew words, it gave you the definitions of the Greek and Hebrew words. Okay? So you could kind of get more in depth of what God was talking about. So I did this word study on worship. And what I found out was that worship was meant to lower yourself and to exalt or make the person or thing you are worshiping to be higher than yourself. You prostrate yourself and you raise that person up. Well, I didn't like that definition. And so I did that word study 4 different times with 4 different scriptures. Okay? And got the same exact result every time. Finally, after the 4th time, I heard God say, have you got it figured out yet? And I started laughing and I said, okay, fine. So worship is not about just singing songs. Worship is about lowering ourselves or prostrating ourselves and making God higher than we are. Okay? It's about not having pride. It's about becoming humble. Humbleness is the opposite of pride. Humbleness means you lower yourself. Okay? So when we think about what Satan did, Satan tried to exalt himself above God because of his pride. He wasn't humble. And because of that lack of humility, he was cast out of heaven. Okay? So if we're to make a conscious decision to not be jealous of God or envious of God and act on that decision, we must worship Him. That worship takes our minds off of ourselves and places our minds on Christ. And you don't have to be in church to do that. Some of the best worship experiences I have ever had have been times when I have been all by myself. Okay? So you prostrate yourself and you lower yourself and you make God higher by exalting Him in worship. Then you'll never, if you do that all the time, you will never ever become jealous of God. Okay? The third step is to make a conscious decision to not be glad when we experience pain or to not despise the good things in our own lives and then act on that decision. So when I wrote that, when I developed this step, I was like, well, how can we be jealous of ourselves? That doesn't make any sense. Well, to answer that question, I had another question pop in my head. Have you ever been so happy about something in your life that you thought that it was too good to be true? Sometimes we think that we are supposed to experience misfortune and pain, and that if we are not doing so, then something is wrong. Some people revel in pain and misery. Some people don't know how to accept God's best for themselves because they don't think they deserve it, and thus they can become envious of themselves. A very good biblical example of this is in the book of Hosea. Hosea was a prophet, And God told him to take a prostitute for a wife. Hosea obeyed and married a prostitute named Gomer. And he loved her deeply. It wasn't just that he was obeying God. He actually fell in love with this woman. But Gomer could not accept his love, and she left him and went back to her prostitution. Hosea went and found her and brought her home. But she left him again to go back to her old life. This this book in the Old Testament was supposed to be a picture of how the Israelites had prostituted themselves to other gods, and how they had left God, the one who truly loved them, to go back to this life of prostituting themselves to other gods. But when I read this, I saw something different. Okay? I saw how that the fact that Gomer could not accept her her the good that had happened in her life. I mean, because Hosea was a godly man, a man of love, and he loved this woman a great deal. And she couldn't accept that. She didn't know how to accept that love because she didn't feel worthy of it. Okay? So she became jealous of her own good fortune. How can he possibly love me like that? I mean, I'm dirty. I'm a prostitute. So instead of trying to figure out how to love that, how to learn how to accept that love and learn how to love herself, she ran away and she went back to her prostitution. She was envious of herself because she could not possibly think that Hosea could truly love her as she was. So when we are envious of ourselves, we are unable to accept the good things in our lives, and we would rather wallow in the pigsty. Okay? And I do know people like that. They would rather wallow in a pigsty than try to truly believe that God has a good plan for their life. Okay? Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for the good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. The way we act on the decision to not envy ourselves is to accept that God is a good God and that he will even use the bad things in our lives to bring about good consequences if we trust him and allow him to do what he needs to do in us to take us out of our pigsties. Well, to do that, before you can even start to do that, you need to want to get out of the pigsty. Remember the prodigal son? He took his inheritance from his father and then went and blew it and ended up, you know, working in a pigsty. And he stayed there and he stayed there until finally one day he woke up and he's like, what am I doing? Wallowing in this pigsty. I need to go home to my father and be a servant to him. Even my father's servants are treated better than I am. So he realized, first of all, that he was in a pigsty and that he didn't want to get out of it, or that he wanted to get out of it. So before you can even make the decision to let God get you out of the pigsty, you have to realize that you're there and then decide you want to be out of it. And then go to God and let him do what is needed to get you out of it. Now, the last step is to make a conscious decision to not be glad when other people experience pain and not to crave what they have and then act on that decision. We are not to be envious of or covet of what other people have around us have. Hebrews 13:5 tells us, "Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you." We are to be content with what we have and not begrudge others what they have. a very good story about this is something I went through just last year. I got involved with the wrong man. I ended up marrying the wrong man. Any of you that might be some friends on Facebook might be aware of this. But I ended up marrying the wrong man. I was married before to a very wonderful man named Dean. Dean was a very man of love. He was a very godly man and a very wonderful man. Wasn't perfect, but a very godly man. And I loved Dean a great deal. Well, he passed away in 2011, and his body was cremated, and I kept his ashes and some other memorabilia from that wedding in a tote that I kept, with me, and I kept in my home. Now, Jason, the man I married in 2019, became very jealous of my first husband. And as a result of that jealousy, he stole the tote that contained my first husband's ashes and all the memorabilia from my first husband. Jason was trying to use that tote to control me and manipulate me. He told me, "Oh, well, I'll give you back all this stuff little by little if you do what I want you to do." That hurt me very, very deeply, and that was the end of that marriage for me. But unfortunately, I had to leave, and I had to leave Jason without giving my first husband's ashes or anything from that tote. The only thing that Jason had given me back was my wedding dress. Everything else he has kept. I don't know what he's done with it, but that hurt me very, very deeply. Okay? When Jason stole that stuff from me, I cried my eyes out. It was like Dean had died all over again. And it just about destroyed our relationship. It really did. Just like the people in the second town, the tower town, destroyed their city hall, that jealousy undermined any relationship I had with Jason. It also destroyed, Lucifer's, um, stay in heaven, and God cast him out. So jealousy is destructive. It destroys things. That's why love is never jealous. Okay? And it was when Jason stole that stuff from me that I realized that he could not possibly love me like he said he did. Because if he loved me like he said he did, he wouldn't have stole that stuff from me. He wouldn't have been jealous of Dean. Okay? Love is not jealous. Love is not envious. And I realized after I left and moved back to, where I belonged, that Jason could not love me and could not be the kind of man I wanted him to be because he didn't love himself. You can't love other people until you love yourself. And I think Jason was jealous of himself because I'm a good, godly woman, and I ended up marrying him. And so just like Gomer and Hosea, she tried to sabotage that relationship by going back to her prostitution. And I think Jason sabotaged, our relationship because he was so jealous of himself because he didn't know how to love himself. Okay? And because he was jealous of Dean, that jealousy, you love others or not love others the way you love or not love yourself. So if you're jealous of somebody else, at least in Jason's case, and I know that he was jealous of, if he's jealous of other people, I know that in Jason's case, he was jealous of himself as well. Okay? We must also not rejoice with others who are hurting, but rejoice with, when others are hurting, but rejoice with those that rejoice and mourn with those that mourn. Romans 12:15, rejoices with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Another way to not be envious of others is to bear one another's burdens. Galatians 6:1 and 2. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Everyone has some sort of burden to bear, and if we would help them to bear that burden, then we would no longer be envious of them. Okay? So that's the last step. Envy or jealousy is not of God. It is of Satan. It is very destructive. Because of their jealousy, the second tower town destroyed their tower, and it also destroyed their city hall. That shows us how destructive envy and jealousy can be. If we are truly going to love, then we need to not be jealous of them or envious, because jealousy and envy are not a part of love. And that jealousy and envy will eventually destroy our lives, just like it destroyed that town's tower. So don't be jealous, folks. Don't be jealous. Don't be jealous of God. Don't be jealous of yourself, and don't be jealous of other people. Jealousy is destructive. Jealousy will destroy your life and the lives of the people around you. Make a conscious choice to get rid of the jealousy. Turn to God. Give that jealousy over to Him, and He can take it from you, and He can throw it away. Okay? Jealousy is going to hurt you. It's going to hurt you in the long run. I don't want to see you people hurt. I don't want to see anybody hurting. So make a conscious choice to get rid of the jealousy or envy in your life. It's only going to help you, not to hurt you. All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Have a good day.